Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of The Mandalorian, which was called The Mines of Mandalore. And as the episode starts, we find ourselves once again on good old Tatooine at the shop of Pelly the mechanic lady, who is hilarious. And we see her dealing with a customer, a member of Greedo's species, whom she seems to scam with the help of some Jawas. And of course, Mando shows up. He's there looking for an IG memory circuit, which Pelly and her Jawa friends indicate doesn't exist and can't be gotten. He explained that he needs IG because he needs a droid to travel ahead of him once they get to Mandalore to make sure that the air is safe to breathe, like down in the mines and whatnot. But what I want to know is, why doesn't he have an oxygen system in his helmet or his suit? Anyway, she tries to sell him an R5 unit, which apparently actually is R5D4. Now, I don't remember if we knew that previously, but if we did, I forgot. And it's crazy that that's actually R5D4 as opposed to just another red R5 astromech. Anyway, he ends up buying R5, even though he had indicated that he wouldn't really have a use for an astromech, before heading off to Mandalore. He then has to fly through some nasty weather upon arriving at Mandalore in order to get to the surface, and he explains to Grogu that there's no way to communicate off the surface because of magnetic interference from what happened during the war. After he lands, he sends R5 over to test the atmosphere at a certain spot, which I guess is the opening to the area where the mines are, or the opening to the route to the mines. And as he and Grogu are watching on the scope to follow R5's little blip, it disappears. And so Mando decides to go looking for him after pressurizing his helmet. So my question again is, why did he need a droid to begin with? Anyway, he enters this giant cavern, and it isn't long before he's attacked by a whole bunch of what look like, I couldn't even describe, kind of creatures. At which point he takes out the darksaber, which he can't really hold because it's too heavy for him, as we know. But he does manage to swing it around a bit, if clumsily, and while he's dealing with this one creature and some of his fellows, they pound the crap out of him. But then he stabs one in the leg with a regular knife, I guess, and slices at another one with the darksaber, and then tosses one over a ledge and kills another one with the darksaber, and escapes being himself killed by these creatures. He then finds R5 off in a corner, knocked on his ass. After this, back on the surface, he looks at the readings from R5 and realizes that the atmosphere is in fact breathable, and that Mandalore is in fact not cursed, the latter of which agrees with what KATAN had told him at one point. He and Grogu then descend way down into what Mando called the Civic Center by flying over the ledge that he had previously thrown one of the creatures over, using their rocket pack and little floating pod, respectively. As they're walking through, once they get to the ground, I'm forced to wonder why he had Grogu come with him, down there, because there's no need for him to be down there, and he would have been much safer from anything that might be down there back in the ship. Anyway, after a while, Mando crouches down to pick up a fallen Mandalorian's helmet, and he's then engulfed by a giant crab-like mech that was hiding under the dirt, which then carries him off as Grogu watches from a hiding spot. After the mech deposits him in some kind of apparatus, it parks, and a crazy, scary-looking, multi-armed droid gets out and reaches into the apparatus and takes Mando's guns and the darksaber off of him, tossing them to the ground. At this point, Grogu gets out of his pod and walks up closer to investigate the situation, at which point he tries to use the Force to free Mando but doesn't succeed, causing Mando to tell him to go see Bo-Katan. So Grogu flies away in his little pod and goes back to the ship, only to be attacked on his way by one of those crazy creatures from before, which he handles with no problem using the Force. He gets in the ship and points to Bo-Katan's location on the scope, telling R5 to go there. And as they take off, they're attacked by some kind of dragon, but they get away from it. Upon arriving at Bo-Katan's place again, she checks R5's memory or records and figures out where Mando is. And she takes off for this location in her ship, which is pretty badass, by the way, with R5 and Grogu. Speaking of badass, Bo-Katan looks amazing in her armor with the helmet on. It's just insane how cool she looks. Anyway, she and Grogu descend down to where Mando got taken. Bo notices that some of the creatures, which are apparently called alamites, the ones from before, are hiding in the ceiling. And so she shoots at the ceiling to bring one of them down and ends up fighting and killing a couple of them. She soon comes upon the spot where Mando is trapped and battles the droid with her guns and the darksaber, which she picked up off the ground. Did I mention that she's a badass? Because she's a badass, and it was great to see her wielding the darksaber the way it was meant to be wielded. But anyway, as she's then talking to Mando, the head of the droid that she just knocked down and defeated detaches from its body and goes to pilot the mech, which it then attacks her with, and she has to fight that with the darksaber as well. Upon succeeding, she makes Mando some soup after freeing him, which he eats by lifting the bottom of his helmet slightly to get it to his mouth, which answers one of my questions from last week to a certain extent, like how do they eat? Now, you can sip from a cup, but like how would you eat? I mean, I guess you could do the same thing with a fork, right? If you had like a chunk of meat on it. Anyway, that's weird. But moving on, Bo offers to take him back with her, but he says he's not going with her because he needs to fulfill his obligations. So she says she'll instead hang around and take him to the living waters. On the way, she talks to him about how things were when she was a princess there, which was pretty interesting. Upon arrival at the living waters, she reads from a plaque that's there, which speaks of a mythical beast, a mythosaur, which is kind of funny because it's just the word myth with the suffix "asaur" attached to it. Anyway, this is the beast that the symbol of Mandalore is based on, and it's a beast that the first Mandalore slayed, a relative of which I suspect is going to show up before the episode ends. Anyway, Mando walks into the living waters reciting the creed, and when he goes under, suddenly Bo has to jump in. She then goes way, way down, finds him, and jetpacks him back to the surface. And on the way up, they do indeed pass by a gigantic creature, which she and Mando fly right by all the way up to the surface, at which point the episode ends. So I was right, there is a mythosaur in the water. Anyway, I really liked this episode. It was very good. I was a little dismayed in this episode that Mando had to be rescued twice. Like, he's supposed to be a badass, and he is when he fights, but like, does he not have any situational awareness? Like, how did he get into so much trouble in this episode? But anyway, that did provide an opportunity for a lot of action in this episode. You know, the fights that he got in, and then the fights that Bo-Katan gets in to rescue him. So I definitely loved all the action, especially the Bo-Katan parts, because I love Katie Sackhoff, whom I've met. I also love the visuals in this episode. You know, Mandalore is this devastated place, but it was rendered in such a way that you can tell that it was a once great place that was, you know, then destroyed. And it just felt creepy and realistic, and I enjoyed that. I loved seeing Peli. She's hilarious. And I loved seeing who we now know is the actual R5-D4. And like I said, if we knew that before, I forgot that it was the actual R5-D4, so I was pleasantly surprised. Anyway, it turns out, according to Wikipedia, that R5 purposely blew his motivator in the original Star Wars movie after Luke's uncle purchased him at R2-D2's request, so that R2 could end up being sold to the uncle instead, after 3PO had already been sold to him. And this is something that I never knew or realized. So I guess the little bleeping and blurping that R2 does as R5 and 3PO walk away from the Jawa sale with Luke and his uncle was him telling R5 to purposely blow his motivator so that they would have to buy him instead. But I have a slight issue with that because, if I'm not mistaken, the Jawas would have understood what he was saying. Or did they not speak ASTROMECH? I'm not clear on that. Certainly 3PO would have understood it, and he didn't say anything, so I don't know. I think this is a retcon. But it's an interesting one. But yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to say about this episode, except that it was really cool. Mando has now bathed in the waters, so is he going to be able to redeem himself back with the armorer? That's something we're going to have to see. Are we going to see more of Bo-Katan? I really hope we do. That would be very cool, because in this episode we got more of her backstory, which of course we've seen in the Clone Wars, but it's always good to hear her talk about it. And maybe she'll do some more of that if we see her in the upcoming episodes. But yeah, great episode. Glad it was longer than the previous one. Looking forward to the next one. I'm going to get out of here for now. I will, of course, be back to review the next episode. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.